When a 911 dispatcher receives a call from a frightened 4-year-old boy claiming his dad won't wake up, it seems like a tragic overdose or health emergency. But as the investigation unfolds, a local detective and a social worker uncover inconsistencies that point to a larger cover-up, connected to a 20-year-old disappearance, a whistleblower, and a town that's protected secrets for far too long. The crackle of static filled the small, dimly lit dispatch room as a call came through on line 3. It wasn't unusual for Sarah Hensley to field odd calls during her late-night shifts in rural Oregon, drunken ramblings, misplaced panic, or even pranksters. But something about this one stopped her cold. 911, what's your emergency? She asked, her voice steady despite the weariness that hurt her like an old sweater. There was a pause, then a small trembling voice broke through the silence. Daddy's been sleeping for days, it said. A child's voice, barely older than toddlerhood. Sarah leaned forward, pen poised over her notepad. Okay, sweetheart, can you tell me where you are? Are you with your daddy right now? He won't wake up, the boy continued, his tone matter-of-fact but tinged with confusion. And it's really cold. Her heart sank. She'd heard enough panicked voices to know when something was wrong, and this little boy's calm delivery only made it worse. Can you tell me your name, honey? Eli? All right, Eli, I'm here to help you. Can you show me where Daddy is? A muffled rustling followed, and then faint footsteps creaked across wooden floorboards. Through the receiver, Sarah could hear the distant hum of wind rattling against glass windows and the occasional groan of settling wood. This wasn't a city apartment. It sounded remote, a cabin maybe, tucked deep into the wilderness. I'm scared, Eli whispered after a moment, his bravado slipping just enough to reveal the fear beneath. It's okay to be scared, Sarah replied gently. But I need you to stay brave for me, okay? Just keep talking to me and we'll figure this out together. More shuffling noises, then silence. When Eli spoke again, his voice quivered. He's here, but he doesn't answer anymore. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She'd signaled to her colleague at the adjacent desk to trace the call while keeping Eli engaged. That's good, Eli. You're doing great. Is there anyone else with you? Mommy, maybe? No, Eli said simply. Just me and Daddy. The line went quiet except for the sound of shallow breathing. Sarah fought the urge to push too hard. She needed to keep him calm. Do you see anything strange around Daddy, Eli? Anything different? Another pause. Then softly, his eyes are open, but they don't move. Sarah swallowed hard. Her colleague gave her a nod. They had a location. Somewhere off Highway 20, miles from the nearest town. Remote. Too remote. Eli, listen carefully, Sarah said, her voice firm but soothing. Help is coming. Very soon some people will come inside to check on you and Daddy, okay? But until then, I want you to go somewhere safe. Do you have a favorite spot in the house? The closet, Eli murmured. Good idea. Go into the closet, close the door, and wait there. Keep talking to me if you can, all right? She heard tiny feet scurry away, followed by the soft click of a door closing. Less than 20 minutes later, flashing red and blue lights pierced the darkness along a narrow dirt road leading to a secluded cabin nestled in the shadow of towering pines. Emergency vehicles crunched over gravel, their headlights cutting through sheets of mist that clung to the forest floor. Inside the cabin, EMTs moved quickly, guided by the faint glow of battery-powered lanterns scattered throughout the space. The air smelled of damp wood and neglect. In the main room, they found him. Michael Granger, sprawled awkwardly on the couch, his face pale and lifeless, eyes wide open but unseeing. One of the paramedics knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. Nothing. No pulse. He glanced up at his partner, shaking his head. No visible injuries, the second medic confirmed after a cursory inspection. Detective Nora Hayes stepped inside moments later, her boots crunching softly on the warped floorboards. A veteran investigator with the county sheriff's department, she'd seen death in all its forms, but there was something unsettling about this scene. 4-year-old kid alone out here, she muttered under her breath, surveying the sparse furnishings and layers of dust coating every surface. In the corner, near the closet, another officer knelt beside a trembling Eli wrapped in a thermal blanket. His wide eyes darted between the strangers crowding his home, searching for answers he couldn't possibly understand. Nora approached cautiously, crouching down to meet his gaze. "Hi there, Eli. My name's Nora. I'm here to help, okay?" Eli nodded hesitantly, clutching the blanket tighter around himself. "You did a really brave thing calling us," Nora said softly. "Do you remember how long Daddy's been asleep?" Eli shook his head. "Lot of nights," he whispered. Nora exchanged a glance with the officer beside her. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been sudden, and yet, no signs of struggle. No blood. No weapon. As she stood and surveyed the eerie stillness of the cabin, one thought lingered in her mind. What kind of nightmare had unfolded in this lonely place? And why would anyone leave a child behind? Grace Holloway tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she navigated the winding road that led to St. Mary's Medical Center in Eugene. The early morning fog clung stubbornly to the trees, casting an almost ethereal pall over the landscape. She'd been awake since before dawn, poring over the sparse details of Eli Granger's case, and already she could feel the weight of it settling onto her shoulders like a leaden cloak. At 52, Grace had seen more than her share of broken families, shattered lives, and children who bore the scars of circumstances far beyond their control. Yet, something about this boy, a 4-year-old found alone in a remote cabin with his dead father, gnawed at her instincts. It wasn't just the isolation or the tragedy, it was the silence surrounding him, the gaps where answers should have been. When she arrived at the hospital, the sterile scent of antiseptic hit her immediately, mingling with the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She made her way to the pediatric wing, where a nurse directed her to a small examination room. Inside, Eli sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. His tiny frame was dwarfed by the oversized hospital gown he wore, its pale blue fabric swamping his thin limbs. He didn't look up when Grace entered, though she noticed his fingers twitch slightly, clutching the hem of the gown as if anchoring himself to something tangible. "Hi, Eli," she said softly, pulling a chair close to the bed. "My name's Grace. I'm here to help you." The boy blinked once, but remained silent. Grace sighed inwardly. This part never got easier. The initial breach of trust, the delicate dance of earning even the smallest measure of cooperation from a child who had likely learned the hard way not to rely on adults. "I heard you were very brave last night," she continued, keeping her tone light. "Calling 911 all by yourself, that must have taken a lot of courage." Eli finally turned his head toward her, his dark eyes wary but curious. "Daddy told me to call if he didn't wake up," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Grace nodded, careful not to push too hard. That was smart of him. "And now we're going to figure out how to take care of you, okay?" For a moment, Eli simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Over the next hour, Grace coaxed fragments of information from him, piecing together what little he could articulate. He spoke haltingly, his words punctuated by long silences, as though each sentence required monumental effort. "Did Daddy ever talk about your mom?" Grace asked gently after a while. Eli shook his head. "She doesn't come back," he said, his voice tinged with a quiet certainty that sent a chill down Grace's spine. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She went away," he replied simply, his gaze dropping to his lap. "A long time ago." Grace hesitated, unsure whether to press further, but then Eli added, almost absently, "Sometimes loud men came when she did. Daddy said we had to hide." Her stomach tightened. Loud men. Hiding. These weren't the words of a child living in a stable home. They hinted at fear, secrecy, and danger lurking just beneath the surface. "And what happened when the loud men came?" she prodded carefully. Eli shrugged, his small shoulders lifting and falling in a gesture eerily adult for someone so young. "We stayed quiet until they left." Grace scribbled notes furiously, trying to make sense of the disjointed narrative. There was no mention of extended family, no indication of anyone else who might step in to care for him. Whoever Michael Granger had been, and whatever demons he'd battled, it seemed he'd deliberately cut himself and his son off from the world. As the interview drew to a close, Grace glanced at the clock. Nearly 2 hours had passed, yet she felt no closer to understanding the full scope of what had happened in that cabin. One thing was clear, however. Eli needed stability, safety, and someone willing to fight for him. Before leaving the hospital, Grace stopped by the nurse's station to review Eli's preliminary medical report. Malnutrition, signs of dehydration, chronic neglect. Each word struck her like a hammer blow, reinforcing the urgency of her task. Back in her car, she dialed her supervisor, bracing herself for the inevitable bureaucratic hurdles ahead. "We need to find placement for him ASAP," she said without preamble. "Foster care, preferably somewhere with experience handling trauma cases. This kid's been through hell, and he deserves better than the system bouncing him around." Her supervisor agreed, though Grace detected the familiar note of resignation in his voice. They both knew the odds stacked against children like Eli, kids who slipped through the cracks of society, their voices drowned out by louder, more immediate crises. But Grace refused to let that happen. Not this time. As she drove back to her office, the image of Eli's hollow eyes lingered in her mind, haunting her like a ghost. Whatever secrets lay buried in that cabin, she vowed to uncover them, not just for justice, but for the sake of the fragile life left behind. Detective Tom Whitaker stood in the doorway of the cabin, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. The morning sun filtered weakly through the dense canopy of pines, casting long shadows across the warped floorboards. He'd been on the job for over 2 decades, but something about this place unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just the isolation or the eerie stillness that clung to the air. It was the absence. Absence of answers. Absence of records. Absence of any trace that Michael Granger had ever belonged here at all. Nothing under his name. Sheriff Linda Morales confirmed as she approached from behind, holding a clipboard. Her boots crunched softly against the gravel outside before falling silent on the wooden threshold. No deed, no lease agreement, nothing. It's like this cabin doesn't officially exist. Tom frowned, glancing around the dim interior. The furnishings were sparse. A sagging couch, a rickety table, and a few mismatched chairs. But they looked older than Michael Granger himself. Dust coated every surface, thick enough to leave trails where investigators had moved through the space. "And utilities?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. "Power's been cut off since February," Linda replied. "Water, too. Looks like they were living off bottled water and whatever food they could scrounge up. Tom nodded grimly. His eyes landed on an open cupboard near the sink, its shelves lined with the rusted cans bearing faded labels. Some of them were so old he couldn't even make out what they once contained. "This isn't survivalism," he muttered under his breath. "This is desperation." He turned back to Linda. "What about neighbors? Anyone know who owns this place?" She shook her head. "Nearest neighbor's a mile away, and they haven't seen anyone come or go in years. Said it's been abandoned for as long as they can remember." Tom let out a slow breath, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. Abandoned cabins weren't uncommon in rural Oregon, but this one felt different. There was too much effort put into keeping it hidden, too many layers of secrecy surrounding Michael Granger and his son. As if sensing his frustration, Linda gestured toward the far corner of the room. "Forensics found something interesting under the floorboards last night. Thought you'd want to take a look." Tom followed her to where a section of warped planks had been pried loose, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside lay a vintage camera, its black metal body scratched and worn with age, alongside several rolls of undeveloped film. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom murmured, crouching down for a closer look. The camera looked like it belonged in a museum, probably from the 70s or earlier, and yet it appeared to have been used recently. "Any idea what's on the film?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would be no. Linda shook her head. "They're sending it to the lab in Salem. Could take a few days to process." Tom straightened, his mind racing. Why would someone go to such lengths to hide something as seemingly innocuous as a camera? And why keep it stashed away in a cabin that didn't officially exist? He turned back to survey the room, his gaze lingering on the couch where Michael Granger's body had been found. Something didn't add up. If the man had died of natural causes, as the initial examination suggested, why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? Why leave a child alone in these conditions for days, possibly weeks? And then there was Eli's cryptic mention of loud men and hiding whenever his mother came around. Was it paranoia? Or had Michael Granger been running from something? Or someone? Tom stepped outside, letting the cool morning air clear his thoughts. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, its weathered exterior blending almost seamlessly with the surrounding forest. From the outside, it looked like any other forgotten structure, swallowed by time and neglect. But inside, it held secrets, layers of them, that begged to be unraveled. As he climbed into his truck, Tom pulled out his notebook and jotted down a single question. Who owned this cabin before Michael Granger? Until he had an answer, everything else, the camera, the undeveloped film, the boy left behind, was just another piece of a puzzle missing its edges. The morgue was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. Detective Tom Whitaker stood at the edge of the stainless steel table, his eyes fixed on the lifeless form of Michael Granger. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting an unforgiving glow over the pale, waxy skin of the dead man. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the county coroner, adjusted her glasses as she flipped through the pages of her report. She had a no-nonsense demeanor that came with years of experience cutting through the mysteries of death, but even she seemed troubled by what she'd uncovered. "Cause of death," she began, her voice steady but tinged with unease, "is poisoning. However," she paused, glancing up at Tom. "I can't identify the substance responsible. It's not something we see in routine toxicology screens." Tom frowned. "Not a heart attack? Not an overdose?" "Nope. His heart was fine, no signs of blockages or prior damage. And while there were trace amounts of alcohol in his system, It wasn't enough to kill him. This is something else entirely. She turned to a nearby monitor, pulling up images from the autopsy. We ran additional tests because of the unusual presentation. Turns out, the compound is highly specialized, something that hasn't been manufactured in decades. According to our toxicologist, it was used primarily in chemical research labs back in the early 2000s. Tom's brow furrowed. You're telling me someone went out of their way to use an obsolete poison? Why go to all that trouble? That's your department, Evelyn replied dryly. But here's the kicker. This stuff doesn't act like most poisons. It doesn't cause immediate symptoms, at least not ones you'd notice right away. Instead, it slowly shuts down organ function over days, maybe even weeks. By the time the victim realizes something's wrong, it's too late. Tom let out a low whistle. So, whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted it to look natural, a gradual decline, rather than something sudden. Evelyn nodded. And they succeeded, for the most part. If Eli hadn't called 911 when he did, we might never have suspected foul play. Tom crossed his arms, his mind racing. Poisoning suggested premeditation, but without evidence of forced entry or struggle, how had it been administered? Had Michael ingested it willingly or unknowingly? As if reading his thoughts, Evelyn gestured toward the body. There's more. Take a look at his shoulder. She pointed to a small scar near Michael's collarbone, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Healed bullet wound. Looks like it happened years ago, judging by the tissue regeneration. No record of it in any medical database, which means he either treated it himself or got patched up somewhere off the grid. Tom leaned closer, studying the mark. A bullet wound, and now this. Whatever Michael Granger was into, it wasn't ordinary. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. You think he was running from something? I think he was hiding, Tom said grimly. That cabin wasn't just remote. It was practically invisible. No records, no utilities, nothing tying him to the place. And now this poison shows up. Something so rare, it shouldn't even exist anymore. Someone wanted him dead, and they weren't taking chances. He straightened, rubbing the back of his neck as he processed the implications. A man living in secrecy, a mysterious toxin, and a 4-year-old boy left behind. All pieces of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with every revelation. What about the compound itself? Tom asked. Do we know where it came from? Who could have accessed it? Evelyn shook her head. Not yet. But given its age and rarity, it's likely whoever obtained it had connections to old research facilities, or black market sources. Tom exhaled sharply, his frustration mounting. So, we're looking for a ghost with access to vintage poisons. Great. He glanced back at Michael's body one last time, his gaze lingering on the scarred shoulder, and the peaceful expression frozen on the man's face. Peaceful, but deceptive. Beneath the surface lay a web of secrets, and somewhere within it, the truth about why Michael Granger had chosen to vanish from the world, only to meet his end in silence. As he left the morgue, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this case was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning. Detective Tom Whitaker sat hunched over his desk, the glow of his computer screen casting harsh shadows across his tired face. The hours had blurred together as he sifted through fragments of Michael Granger's life, piecing together what little remained. But the deeper he dug, the more elusive the truth became. For the past 15 years, Michael Granger might as well have been a ghost. No social media profiles, no tax records, no utility bills or credit card statements. It was as if he'd deliberately erased himself from existence, a feat that required either meticulous planning or significant resources. Tom leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He'd started with the basics: birth certificate, school records, employment history. Everything checked out until 2007. After that, nothing, just silence. And then there was the letter. It had been tucked inside a worn leather journal found among Michael's sparse belongings at the cabin. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, as though written hastily under duress. Addressed simply to R.M., it read, "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. They're watching everything now. Every move, every word. Project Sandglass isn't what they said it was. You were right to walk away. I should have listened sooner. If anything happens to me, take care of Eli. Tell him I tried." The words sent a chill down Tom's spine. Project Sandglass. A cryptic warning. And someone named R.M., who may or may not still be alive. He tapped the edge of the paper against his desk, his mind racing. What kind of project warranted such paranoia? And why would Michael entrust his son to someone whose identity was reduced to initials? Before he could dwell on it further, his phone buzzed. It was Grace Holloway. "I think I found something," she said without preamble. Her voice carried an urgency that made him sit up straighter. "What is it?" "A missing file. From 2007. She paused, letting the significance sink in. Michael Granger was questioned by federal investigators in connection with a corporate espionage case involving a biotech company called Genova Tech. Ever heard of them? Tom frowned. The name rang a distant bell, but nothing concrete. Refresh my memory. They specialized in biochemical research, everything from pharmaceuticals to experimental compounds. Big player back in the early 2000s. Then they folded suddenly in late 2007 amid allegations of illegal testing and unethical practices. Most of their projects were classified, and when they went under, so did the records. Tom's pulse quickened. Illegal testing? Like chemical compounds? Possibly, Grace replied. But here's the kicker. According to one of the old case files I uncovered, Michael wasn't just some random employee caught up in the scandal. He worked in their security division, which gave him access to sensitive areas and people. Tom's thoughts flashed back to the autopsy report. A rare, obsolete toxin used in labs during that era. Could Genova Tech have been manufacturing it? And if so, why would someone want Michael dead now, over a decade later? Anything else? He asked. One more thing, Grace said, her tone softer now. Eli mentioned allowed men coming whenever his mom did. What if those men weren't strangers? What if they were connected to whatever Michael was running from? Tom exhaled, slowly, staring at the letter again. The pieces were starting to fit together, but not neatly. This wasn't just about Michael Granger. It was about secrets buried deep within a defunct corporation, about experiments that never saw the light of day, and about a man who had chosen to disappear rather than face the consequences. Keep digging into Genova Tech, he told Grace. Find out everything you can about Project Sandglass, and see if anyone remembers who RM is or was. As he hung up, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something much larger than he'd anticipated. Somewhere out there, someone knew the truth about Michael Granger, and they weren't talking. But Tom Whitaker wasn't the type to let ghosts stay buried. The lab technician slid the envelope across the counter, her expression unreadable. Detective Tom Whitaker picked it up with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Inside were the developed photographs from the vintage camera found hidden beneath the floorboards of Michael Granger's cabin. He carried the envelope back to his desk, carefully spilling its contents onto the surface. The images were grainy, their edges slightly blurred, a product of both age and the outdated film, but they told a story far clearer than Tom had expected. The first few shots depicted what appeared to be chemical lab equipment. Rows of glass beakers, pipettes, and vials arranged on stainless steel countertops. Some of the labels were too faint to read, but others bore familiar logos. Logos that sent a jolt through Tom when he recognized them. Genova Tech. But it wasn't just the branding that caught his attention. Scattered among the equipment were documents. Hidden folders marked with cryptic codes and redacted stamps. The kind of paperwork that screamed classified. Tom flipped to the next set of photos, his heart pounding as the narrative unfolded before him. In one image, two men stood in the middle of what looked like an abandoned facility, their faces partially obscured by shadows. They were arguing, or at least one man was gesturing wildly while the other listened with folded arms. And then there was the final photo, a close-up of the second man's face, unmistakably captured in profile. His features were sharp, his expression intense. Tom stared at the image for a long moment before pulling out his phone and dialing Grace Holloway. "Send me everything you have on Robert Millen," he said without preamble. Grace hesitated. Robert Millen? The whistleblower who vanished during the Genetra Labs scandal? The same. A pause. "Why do I get the feeling you've already made the connection?" "Because I have," Tom replied grimly. "I'm looking at him right now." By the time Grace arrived at the station, Tom had spread the photos across his desk, organizing them into a makeshift timeline. He pointed to the clearest shot of Robert Millen, his finger tapping the glossy surface. "This is him," Tom said. "No doubt about it. Same guy who disappeared after accusing Genetra Labs of falsifying data and conducting unauthorized experiments. The media had a field day with that case for about a week. Then it dropped off the radar completely." Grace studied the photo, her brow furrowing. "What's he doing in these pictures? And where are they taken?" "That's what we need to figure out," Tom replied. "These aren't random snapshots. Someone went to great lengths to document this place, and whatever was happening inside it." He gestured to the other images. "Look at this setup. High-end lab equipment, sensitive documents. This isn't some rogue operation. Whoever ran this facility had serious backing and serious resources." Grace nodded slowly. Genova Tech and Genetra Labs weren't competitors, but they operated in the same space. Both had government contracts. Both dealt with experimental compounds. If Millen ended up working for Genova Tech after he disappeared, it would explain why he hasn't been seen since, Tom finished. But it doesn't answer the bigger question. What does any of this have to do with Michael Granger? Grace pulled up a chair, her eyes scanning the photos again. Maybe Michael wasn't just security. Maybe he stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see. Tom frowned. Like Project Sandglass. Exactly. Grace leaned forward, her voice dropping. Think about it. Michael hides these photos, along with that letter addressed to R.M., Robert Millen. Whatever Project Sandglass was, it scared him enough to go off the grid for 15 years. And now someone's gone to extreme lengths to silence him permanently. Tom exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. So, we're dealing with two missing men, a defunct biotech company, and a project that no one wants to talk about. Great. Just great. Grace gave him a wry smile. Welcome to the rabbit hole, Detective. Later that evening, Tom sat alone in his office, staring at the photos once more. Each image seemed to raise more questions than answers. Yet one thing was becoming painfully clear. Michael Granger hadn't died because of something he did recently. He'd died because of something he knew or saw a long time ago. As he packed up for the night, his mind kept circling back to Eli. The boy had lost both parents to forces far beyond his understanding. and unless Tom could unravel the tangled web surrounding Michael's death, Eli might never know the truth about what happened to his family. Somewhere out there, the pieces of this puzzle were waiting to be found. All Tom had to do was keep digging. The drive to the outskirts of Eugene took Grace Holloway nearly an hour, but she barely noticed the time. Her mind was consumed by the name scribbled hastily on a scrap of paper in her lap. Anna Granger. It had been pure luck that led Grace to her. While combing through old news archives about Genova Tech and its shadowy connections, she'd stumbled upon a tip-off from a local activist group. Someone matching Anna's description had been spotted years ago, living off-grid in the dense woods outside town. A woman who never spoke much, but seemed to know far too much about corporate scandals involving pharmaceutical companies. When Grace finally arrived at the secluded clearing, she found a small, weathered cabin nestled among towering trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the faint scent of wood smoke hung in the crisp autumn air. She knocked on the door, heart pounding in anticipation. After a long pause, the door creaked open just wide enough for a pair of wary eyes to peer out. The woman standing there looked older than the pictures Grace had seen online. Her face lined with years of hardship, her dark hair streaked with gray, but there was no mistaking her resemblance to Michael Granger. "Anna Granger?" Grace asked gently. The woman stiffened, her grip tightening on the edge of the door. "Who's asking?" "My name is Grace Holloway. I work with Child Protective Services. Your son Eli. He's safe, but there are things you need to know." For a moment, Anna didn't move. Then, with a quiet sigh, she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said softly. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but tidy, with shelves lined with books and jars of preserved food. Anna gestured for Grace to sit at the wooden table near the window, where sunlight filtered through thin curtains. "You're probably wondering why I'm still alive," Anna began without preamble, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. Grace nodded. "Eli told us you went away. We assumed." "That I was dead?" Anna gave a bitter laugh. "We wanted people to think that, both of us did. It was the only way to keep him, and ourselves, safe." "Safe from what?" Grace pressed. Anna hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the window as if searching for the right words. "From men who didn't want the truth to come out. Men who would do anything to protect their secrets." She turned back to Grace, her expression hardening. "Michael worked security for Genova Tech, but he wasn't blind. He started noticing things they didn't want anyone to see. Documents left out carelessly, conversations overheard in hallways. And then, one night, he saw something he couldn't unsee." Grace leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What did he see?" Anna swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. "Human testing. On vulnerable populations, prisoners, undocumented immigrants, even children. They were using experimental compounds on them, seeing how far they could push before it killed them." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "And Project Sandglass, was that part of it?" Anna nodded grimly. "That was the code name for one of the worst experiments. A slow-acting poison disguised as medication. They claimed it was meant to treat chronic illnesses, but really, it was designed to eliminate subjects deemed expendable. Michael found files proving it, all meticulously documented, all sanctioned by higher-ups. Instead of reporting it, you disappeared," Grace said slowly. "We didn't have a choice," Anna replied, her voice breaking. "If we stayed, they would have silenced us. For good. So we faked our deaths, changed our names, and vanished. For years, we lived quietly, thinking we'd escaped. But then, her voice trailed off, pain flickering across her face. Then Michael died, Grace finished softly. Anna nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. He swore he'd cut ties completely, but I think he must have tried to reach out to someone he trusted. Maybe RM, whoever that is. Or maybe he thought he could finally expose the truth. Either way, it got him killed. Grace sat back, absorbing the weight of Anna's words. Human testing, poison disguised as medicine, secrets buried so deep they could destroy lives, and had already claimed at least one. What happens now? Anna asked quietly. Grace met her gaze, resolve hardening in her own. Now, we make sure Eli knows the truth about his father, and we find out who's responsible for this, not just for Michael's sake, but for everyone who suffered because of what they did. As Grace rose to leave, Anna reached out and grabbed her hand. Be careful, she whispered. These people, they don't play fair. Grace nodded. She knew the risks. But as she walked back to her car, one thought echoed in her mind. The truth had been hidden for too long. It was time to bring it into the light. Detective Tom Whitaker stared at the documents spread across his desk, each piece of evidence painting a darker picture of the town he thought he knew. The names stared back at him like ghosts from the past. Names of people who had sworn to protect and serve, yet seemed entangled in something far more sinister. It started with a hunch, an offhand comment from an elderly resident during one of Whitaker's routine interviews. You know, the man had said, leaning heavily on his cane, back in the day, some folks got real cozy with those big companies. Didn't ask too many questions so long as the money kept flowing. At first, Whitaker dismissed it as idle gossip, but then he dug deeper. Financial records, property deeds, and old bank statements began to surface, revealing connections that made his blood run cold. The retired sheriff, Harold Becker, had purchased a lakeside cabin outright in 2005. A transaction funded by an anonymous donor traced to a shell company linked to Genetra Labs. Dr. Ellen Marlowe, the town's former physician, had received consulting fees for medical advisory services around the same time Eli mentioned loud men visiting their home. And Councilwoman Margaret Hayes, still active in local politics, had quietly invested in pharmaceutical startups tied to Genovatech shortly before its collapse. Whitaker sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he processed the implications. These weren't just random coincidences. They were threads woven into a tapestry of corruption stretching back decades, and Michael Granger had somehow unraveled part of it. His next breakthrough came when he revisited Eli's fragmented memories. During another session with Grace Holloway, the boy recalled something new. Daddy went to the woods last summer. He said he needed to get something important. What did he say it was? Grace asked gently. A box, Eli replied, frowning as if trying to recall more details. He said it was buried near the old camp. Old Camp Willow Creek, a defunct summer retreat nestled deep in the forest, had been abandoned since the early 2000s. Whitaker wasted no time heading there, armed with a metal detector and a growing sense of urgency. After hours of searching, he struck gold, or rather, plastic. Buried beneath layers of dirt and decaying leaves was a small waterproof container. Inside should have been the hard drive Michael Granger risked everything to retrieve. But it was gone. In its place was a note, written hastily in block letters. Stop digging or the boy will pay. Back at the station, Whitaker showed the note to Grace, who paled visibly. They're watching us, she murmured. And they know about Eli, Whitaker added grimly. He pulled out a map of the surrounding area, marking key locations: the cabin where Michael died, Old Camp Willow Creek, and the homes of the implicated officials. Each point formed a loose triangle, suggesting a network of surveillance and control that spanned years. "This isn't just about covering up corporate crimes anymore," Whitaker said. "This is personal. Someone out there knows exactly what we're doing, and they're willing to threaten a child to stop us." Grace nodded, her jaw tightening. "We need to move fast. If they think we're close." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. That evening, Whitaker paid a visit to Dr. Marlowe, under the guise of routine questioning. Her office, though modest, bore traces of wealth: a Persian rug, polished mahogany furniture, and framed diplomas lining the walls. "I'm sorry, Detective," she said coolly after he mentioned Genitra Labs. "I haven't heard that name in years. What does this have to do with Michael Granger?" "It might have everything to do with him," Whitaker replied, studying her carefully. "Did you ever treat him, or his wife?" Marlowe hesitated, just briefly, before shaking her head. "No, I don't believe I did. As I said, it's been years since I worked with any major corporations." Yet her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses, betraying nerves she couldn't fully conceal. By the end of the week, Whitaker had pieced together enough to suspect that the missing hard drive contained damning evidence, not just of human experimentation, but of collusion between powerful figures in the town and the very companies they claimed to regulate. But retrieving it wouldn't be easy. Whoever took it knew its value, and the lengths others would go to obtain it. As Whitaker prepared to leave the station late one night, he glanced at the photo of Michael Granger pinned to his bulletin board. The man's eyes seemed to bore into him, demanding justice not only for himself, but for the countless lives destroyed by greed and silence. "We'll find it," Whitaker muttered under his breath. "For Eli, for Anna, for everyone who deserved better than this." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers of secrets long buried, and threats yet to come. The rain hammered against the windows of Grace Holloway's small apartment, the rhythmic patter blending with the low hum of her laptop. Across the table, Detective Tom Whitaker leaned over a stack of Michael Granger's journals, his brow furrowed in concentration. Anna sat beside him, her hands trembling as she traced the faded ink of her late husband's handwriting. "This has to be it," Anna said, pointing to a series of cryptic symbols scrawled in the margins of one page. "Michael always used these codes when he wanted to mark something important without drawing attention." Grace leaned closer, studying the markings. "It looks like coordinates," she observed, "but they're jumbled, like a cipher." Tom nodded, pulling out a map of the region. "If we can decode this, we might finally locate the hard drive." Anna's eyes flickered with determination. "He taught me how to read these codes years ago, just in case." Her voice trailed off, but the weight of her unspoken words hung heavy in the room. For the next hour, the trio worked together, cross-referencing the symbols with landmarks Michael had referenced in his entries. Slowly, a pattern emerged, a set of coordinates leading to the edge of Harold Becker's sprawling property, deep within the dense woods bordering his private lake. The drive to Becker's estate felt interminable, the storm intensifying as if nature itself conspired against them. By the time they parked on an isolated dirt road a mile from the property line, the wind whipped violently through the trees, and lightning illuminated the horizon in jagged bursts. "We'll have to go on foot from here," Tom said, adjusting the strap of his flashlight. "If Becker catches us trespassing, we'll need plausible deniability." Grace glanced at Anna, whose face was pale but resolute. "Are you sure about this?" Grace asked quietly. Anna nodded. I owe it to Michael. To Eli. They moved cautiously through the forest, guided by the faint glow of their flashlights and the coordinates marked on Tom's GPS device. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine needles, every sound amplified by the oppressive silence of the storm. Finally, they reached the spot. A cluster of rocks partially concealed by moss and fallen branches. Anna knelt, brushing away debris until her fingers brushed against something metallic. It's here, she whispered, pulling out a small waterproof case. Inside was the hard drive, its surface scratched but intact. Back at Grace's apartment, they connected the hard drive to her computer, holding their breath as files began to populate the screen. What they found chilled them to the core. Video logs played silently, showing grainy footage of lab experiments conducted on unwilling participants, men, women, even children. Internal memos detailed protocols for human testing, signed off by executives whose names were now infamous. And then there were the lists. Names of test subjects, employees involved, and officials who turned a blind eye in exchange for payouts or favors. Among the documents was a file labeled Project Sandglass containing detailed reports on the development and deployment of the slow-acting toxin that had killed Michael Granger. It confirmed what Anna had suspected all along. The poison wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool designed to eliminate evidence while leaving no trace. Grace scrolled through the files, her hands trembling. This changes everything. These aren't just corporate crimes. They're war crimes. Tom clenched his jaw, his expression grim. And someone's still protecting them. That note at the camp. This isn't over yet. Anna stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face. Michael knew this would cost him his life, she murmured. But he did it anyway. For Eli. For everyone who suffered because of them. As dawn broke outside, the three of them sat in silence, the enormity of what they'd uncovered settling over them like a suffocating blanket. They had the proof they needed, but exposing it would come at a price. Whoever took the original hard drive knows we're on to them, Tom said finally. We need to decide how far we're willing to go to bring this to light. Grace met his gaze, resolve hardening in her eyes. Far enough, she said firmly, because if we don't, they'll keep killing, keep hiding, and nothing will ever change. Anna nodded, her gripping Michael's journal tightly. Then, let's finish what he started. The sound of shattering glass jolted Grace Holloway awake. Her heart pounded as she bolted upright in bed, the faint glow of her bedside clock reading 3:47 a.m. For a moment, she froze, straining to listen over the storm raging outside. Then came the unmistakable creak of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. Grace grabbed her phone from the nightstand and slid out of bed, her bare feet pressing against the cold wooden floor. She sent a quick text to Detective Whitaker. Break in at my place. Call police. Before creeping toward the hallway, her pulse hammering in her ears. The intruder moved with precision, heading straight for her office. Light spilled under the door as they rifled through her desk, searching for something specific. Grace's stomach churned. There was only one thing they could want, the hard drive. She didn't wait to see their face. Instead, she slipped into the bathroom and locked the door behind her, dialing 911 with shaking hands. By the time the police arrived minutes later, the intruder was gone, and so were the files. At the foster care center the next morning, Detective Tom Whitaker watched Eli Granger play quietly in the corner of the brightly lit room. The boy seemed oblivious to the danger lurking just beyond his reach, or perhaps he simply didn't know how to process it yet. but Tom knew better than to underestimate whoever was after them. As he stood near the window, sipping coffee and pretending to read a newspaper, his eyes scanned the parking lot outside. That's when he saw him. A man leaning casually against a black sedan, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the building. Something about the man's posture set off alarms in Tom's mind. He wasn't there to pick up a child or drop one off. He was waiting, watching. Tom stepped outside, keeping his distance but closing in steadily. When the man noticed him approaching, he straightened abruptly, tossing a cigarette to the ground and reaching for the car door. "Hold up," Tom called, flashing his badge. "I'd like a word." The man hesitated, then gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Detective," he said smoothly, his voice carrying an accent Tom couldn't quite place. "Bit early for house calls, isn't it?" "I could ask you the same question," Tom replied, stepping closer. "What brings you here today?" The man shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Just admiring the architecture. These old buildings have character, don't they?" Tom wasn't buying it. "You might want to rethink your cover story. We both know why you're really here." For a split second, the man's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of irritation. Then, without another word, he climbed into his car and sped away, tires squealing against the asphalt. Back at the station, Tom ran the license plate number through every database he could access. It led him to a dead end, a rental company operating under a shell corporation registered in Delaware. But when he dug deeper, cross-referencing the name of the company with other cases tied to Genetra Labs, a pattern emerged. The Shell Corporation, Blackthorn Holdings, had been implicated in multiple lawsuits over the years, all quietly settled out of court. Its directors? Names that kept cropping up in connection with the Genetra's shadowy operations. "This isn't random," Tom muttered to himself, pinning a photo of the mysterious man to his bulletin board alongside maps, documents, and surveillance photos. "They're organized, professional, and they're not going to stop until they get what they came for." He picked up his phone and dialed Grace. "We need to move Eli, now." Grace answered on the first ring, her voice tense. "I already thought of that. I've arranged for him to stay with a trusted colleague temporarily, but Tom—" She hesitated, her tone dropping. "They took everything. All the evidence we had on that hard drive, it's gone." Tom clenched his jaw, frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Not everything," he said firmly. "We still have Anna, and we still have Michael's journals. Whoever these people are, they're desperate. That means we're close to something big." Grace sighed heavily. "Close doesn't mean safe. If they're willing to send someone after 4-year-old, they won't touch him." Tom interrupted, his voice steely. "I'll make sure of it." As he hung up, Tom stared at the growing web of connections on his board. Every thread led back to Genetra Labs and its legacy of corruption. But now those threads were tightening around them, pulling them deeper into a fight they couldn't afford to lose. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching, waiting. And Tom knew it was only a matter of time before they made their next move. Grace Holloway sat in her car outside the dimly lit diner, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Across from her, through the rain-speckled windshield, she could see Rachel Meyer, a veteran investigative journalist with a reputation for taking on impossible stories, sitting in a booth near the back. Rachel's laptop was open on the table, its screen casting a faint blue glow across her face. This was it, the moment of no return. Once Grace handed over the video logs and documents, there would be no going back. The truth about Genetra Labs, Project Sandglass, and the human experiments would explode into the public consciousness, exposing decades of corruption and cover-ups. Lives would change forever, including hers. Taking a deep breath, Grace stepped out of the car and walked inside. Rachel didn't waste time with pleasantries. As soon as Grace slid into the booth, she leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the flash drive Grace placed on the table. "You're sure about this?" Rachel asked, her tone serious but tinged with urgency. "Once I publish this, you won't just have the FBI knocking on your door. You'll have every corporate lawyer in the country breathing down your neck." "I'm sure," Grace replied without hesitation. "Michael Granger gave his life to protect these files. If we don't act now, more people will die, and those responsible will walk away scot-free." Rachel nodded grimly, slipping the flash drive into her laptop. She scrolled through the contents quickly, her expression hardening with each passing second. When she reached the footage of the lab experiments, the faces of terrified subjects, the cold indifference of the scientists overseeing them, her jaw tightened. This is monstrous," she murmured, shaking her head. "How did something like this stay buried for so long?" "Money," Grace said simply, "and power. Enough to buy silence from everyone who mattered." Rachel closed the laptop and looked Grace straight in the eye. "All right. I'll run the story tomorrow morning, but you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just local news, it's national. Maybe even global." Grace nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. Do whatever it takes to get the truth out. The next morning, the headline splashed across the front page of the National Chronicle sent shockwaves through the country. "Exposed. Decades of human experimentation by major pharmaceutical companies." Within hours, the story went viral. News outlets picked it up, dissecting the damning evidence contained in Michael Granger's files. Social media erupted with outrage as people shared the names of officials, executives, and corporations implicated in the scandal. By noon, federal agents descended on the small Oregon town, raiding properties tied to Harold Becker, Dr. Ellen Marlowe, and Councilwoman Margaret Hayes. Arrests were made swiftly, though some key players, like the shadowy man seen lurking near Eli's foster care center, remained elusive. As whistleblower protections were enacted nationwide, calls for justice grew louder. Former employees of Genitra Labs came forward, corroborating Michael's findings and adding layers of detail to the horrifying narrative. One by one, the walls protecting the guilty began to crumble. Detective Tom Whitaker watched the chaos unfold from his office, feeling a mix of relief and unease. The case that had consumed him for weeks was finally breaking wide open, but at a cost. His phone buzzed incessantly with updates from colleagues, reporters, and even anonymous tips. Among the messages was one from Anna Granger. "Thank you," it read. "Michael's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Tom stared at the words, letting them sink in. Michael hadn't just been running from danger. He'd been biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike back against those who had destroyed lives, including his own families. By staying hidden, he'd ensured Eli's safety while gathering enough evidence to bring down an empire built on suffering. It was a gamble that had cost him everything, but it had worked. Later that evening, Tom visited Eli at the safe house where he was staying temporarily. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring in a picture book, seemingly unfazed by the storm raging around them, or perhaps unaware of it altogether. "Hey, champ," Tom said, softly, kneeling beside him. "How are you holding up?" Eli shrugged, his crayon moving steadily across the page. "I miss Daddy," he said simply. Tom swallowed hard, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your dad loved you very much, Eli. Everything he did it to keep you safe." Eli looked up, his dark eyes searching Tom's face. "Will the bad men go away now?" Tom hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, buddy. They're going to go away, for good." That night, as the world grappled with the fallout of the exposé, Grace stood on her porch, watching the rain wash away the remnants of the storm. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a cup of tea, but her resolve remained unshaken. Michael Granger's final journal entry echoed in her mind. "If anything happens to me, take care of Eli. Tell him I tried." She had done just that, and more. The truth was out, and the darkness that had festered for so long was finally seeing the light. For the first time in weeks, Grace allowed herself a small, weary smile. Justice wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was worth fighting for. The sun filtered softly through the curtains of Grace Holloway's modest home, casting warm golden light across the living room. It had been months since the storm that upended their lives, a storm of secrets, lies, and justice long overdue, but the echoes still lingered. For Grace, those echoes were reminders not just of what they had endured, but of the fragile life now entrusted to her care. Eli sat at the coffee table, his tiny hands wrapped around a fistful of crayons as he focused intently on the paper before him. His drawings had become a kind of therapy, each one revealing fragments of his emotions in ways words never could. At first, they were chaotic scribbles, dark blues and angry reds swirling together like storms on paper. But lately, they had softened, filled with brighter colors and shapes that hinted at healing. Grace watched him quietly from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride and affection. Adoption proceedings had been swift, thanks in part to the whistleblower protections enacted after the scandal broke. There was no question where Eli belonged anymore. He was hers now, in every way that mattered. "What you working on, kiddo?" she asked, gently, stepping closer. Eli glanced up, his face lighting up with a shy smile. "It's Daddy," he said, holding out the drawing for her to see. Grace knelt beside him, taking in the image. A figure stood among puffy white clouds, arms stretched wide as if embracing the sky. Below, a small house nestled amid trees, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. In the corner, scrawled in uneven letters, were the words, "Daddy," watching from the clouds. Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she traced at the edge of the page with trembling fingers. "This is beautiful, Eli," she whispered. "Do you think he's happy there?" Eli nodded solemnly. "He told me so. He said he tried his best, and now he can rest." Grace pulled him into a tight hug, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "He did try his best," she murmured. "And because of him, we're safe now. You're safe." She leaned back, meeting his gaze with a watery smile. "You know what? I think your daddy finally found peace. And now it's your turn to find it too." Eli tilted his head thoughtfully, then grinned. "I already did. With you." Later that afternoon, Grace took Eli to the park near their home. The town felt quieter now, its once oppressive shadows replaced by a cautious optimism. Many of the officials implicated in the scandal had been stripped of their power, their crimes laid bare for all to see. Others remained missing, fugitives from justice, but even their absence carried a sense of closure. As Eli ran ahead, chasing leaves blown by the crisp autumn wind, Grace paused beneath a towering oak tree. She closed her eyes, letting the breeze brush against her face, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and pine. For so long, she'd carried the weight of broken families and shattered lives on her shoulders, wondering if any of it truly made a difference. But standing here now, with Eli laughing in the distance and the memory of Michael Granger's sacrifice etched into her heart, She knew the answer. It mattered. All of it mattered. That evening, as they curled up together on the couch with a bowl of popcorn between them, Grace tucked a blanket around Eli's shoulders. On the television screen, an animated movie played, its cheerful music filling the room. Yet Grace couldn't help but glance at the framed drawing sitting on the mantel, the one of Michael among the clouds. "He's proud of you, you know," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Eli's forehead. Eli yawned, snuggling closer. "I know," he replied sleepily, "but I'm proud of him too." Grace smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars and the endless expanse of sky, Michael Granger was finally at peace. And here, in this quiet little home, his son was beginning to thrive. The wind rattled gently against the windows, whispering its secrets before fading into silence.